And welcome to this very special event hosted by the University of Virginia Center for Politics and our Global Perspectives on Democracy program, as we welcome former Sri Lankan President Chandrika Kumaratunga to the University of Virginia and to this very special place, the Dome Room here at the university. The center began its relationship with Sri Lanka in March 2009 when we hosted a group of 18 young professionals representing marginalized communities within Sri Lanka. These delegates exchanged ideas with experts on pluralism in America, the importance of civic engagement, and American government and history. Since then, we've sent some of our key staff, including Damon Irby and Meg Huback, there's Meg, to Sri Lanka to conduct workshops on civic engagement, federalism, and new media applications, and hosted another group of college students from Sri Lanka in June 2010. And they were here with us for 4 weeks, learning about new media journalism, freedom of the press, pluralism, and again, civic engagement. This is part of our attempt at the Center for Politics to engage with the world. It's essential, I think, for every university department to have a global program. And I think to be taken seriously, you have to have a global program in the 21st century. All of these experiences have led us here to this evening, and we are very grateful to UVA Professor Emeritus H.L. Senavarotti, who was integral to the fruition of this evening. Where is H.L.? See here? Thank you so much for helping us to arrange all of this. Well, let's now introduce the former president, who had 2 terms in office from 1994 through 2005. I think you were cheated a year as I'm adding this up, since you had 11 years, and I think it was supposed to add up to 12. Maybe you can explain what happened. By the way, the president's on her way to Harvard to lecture there tomorrow, and that's as it should be. They're in second place. So we appreciate that, Madam President. You certainly have chosen wisely. Born in 1945 to 2 future prime ministers. The president comes from a long line of public servants. Her father was elected prime minister in 1956 and held that office until his death, unfortunately by assassination, in 1959. Sri Lanka's international airport in Colombo is in fact named in his honor. In 1960, her mother was elected the world's first female prime minister and served for a total of 18 years. And I'm old enough to remember when your mother was elected. This was headline news around the world because female heads of state were virtually unheard of. And so this was front page news in the United States and every place else. After completing secondary school in Sri Lanka, the president earned a degree in political science from the University of Paris and pursued graduate studies in developmental economics in the same university. Upon returning to her home country, she became involved in politics with the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, and in 1978 served as a consultant to the United States Food and Agriculture Organization. In 1994, she became the first woman to be elected executive president of Sri Lanka. During her time in office, she combated violent extremism and corruption in government and was an advocate for human rights. Her administration was dedicated to negotiating an end to the terrible violence that we all read about for so many years with the militant separatist groups, the Tamil Tigers, and maintained her policy even after the group badly wounded her in an unsuccessful assassination attempt in 1999, from which she has obviously fully recovered, and we're delighted about that. Over the course of more than 3 decades in public life, the president has earned a reputation as a hands-on problem solver with unparalleled energy. Early in her presidency, when a reporter requested to shadow her for several days, I love this, the president replied, "You can come along one day, and if you can keep up, you're welcome to try another." That's often true, by the way, with the press. They're not used to working as hard as some politicians. Apologies to any press people who are here, but you know it's true. Since retiring from public office in 2005, the president has invested herself in civil society activities. She currently serves as the chairperson of both the CBK Foundation for Democracy and Justice and the South Asia Policy and Research Institute. an independent think tank focused on promoting programs in South Asia. She's a frequent panelist and advisor to President Clinton's Global Initiative. She's also a member of the Council of Women World Leaders, an international network of current and former women presidents and prime ministers whose mission it is to mobilize the highest level women's leaders globally for collective action on issues of critical importance to women and equitable development. In 2009, she was appointed to the 12-member board of directors of the Club of Madrid, an independent nonprofit organization created to promote democracy and change in the international community. Composed of 80 former presidents and prime ministers from 56 countries, the Club of Madrid is the world's largest forum of former heads of state and government. We are delighted to have her here. Once she gives her presentation, I'm going to open with one question, and then we're going to immediately, after that is answered, throw it open to the audience. So be thinking of what you wish to ask the President, and please join me in giving her a warm University of Virginia welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Larry Sabato, Director of the Center for Politics. Mr. Damon Irby, the Center Director of Global Initiatives. Mary Brown, Meg Hubert, and my friend, Professor H.L. Seneviratne. Ladies and gentlemen, I would first like to express how happy I am to be here today in this great institution, the University of Virginia, for the first time formally to talk to you on a subject which is very essential to most of our countries and especially to mine. Also, I would like to thank all of you concerned for the very warm welcome and hospitality I received in the last 1 day since I arrived here in Virginia, in this beautiful region of Virginia, which I have not had the pleasure of visiting too often. Today we saw a few most interesting sights, which especially the visit to President Madison's residence, which was a very inspiring one. Now, I would like to present some thoughts on conflict, the resolution of conflict, and peace building. These subjects have been dealt with since time immemorial, for human conflict has existed since the dawn of human society. It remains the most pressing problem in our age because conflict, intrastate as well as interstate, continues to bedevil our world. The nature and scope of both types of conflict have undergone a paradigm shift during the 20th century, posing a severe threat to the very existence of our world. The most urgent challenge humanity faces today is to find solutions to preempt conflict or to resolve them when they have occurred. Conflict and the resultant violence not only drain away economic and human resources, but they destroy the soul of nations for generations to come. Political conflicts are mainly of two types. First, interstate, between two or several states, and secondly, intrastate, between the state and one or more groups living within it. The first type has become rare since the Second World War and the creation of international structures to deal with interstate problems, such as the UNO, the European Union, the International Court of Justice, and so many other regional and international bodies. The invention of nuclear weaponry has also played a not inconsiderable role in the containment of international conflicts. However, the occurrence of conflict within states has not abated. The process of decolonization in the second half of the 20th century and the emergence of independent states gave rise to demands from communities of homogeneous ethnic, linguistic, religious groups living within these new states. The refusal to recognize these rights has resulted in struggles leading at times to full-blown terrorism. The ideologies and attitudes of a state and its elites regarding conflict can be classified into two groups. The first would maintain that the leaders of uprisings and the associated demands are caused by the desire for personal gain, power, and wealth, that they harbor some sinister plans to destroy the state, together with the dominant class, and grab the privileges for themselves. The other view recognizes that there may exist causes that have given rise to these demands and the ensuing conflicts, that these causes must be understood and action taken to resolve them. This view holds that the elimination of the root causes of conflict would either prevent or end conflict, as the case may be. My personal experience in dealing with conflict and its resolution has convinced me of the truth and correctness of the second premise. The search for root causes of conflict has led to diverse theories. The often cited cause is poverty and income deprivation. Another much studied cause is identity. The politics of identity leading to the theory of the right to self-determination flourished with the freedoms obtained and enjoyed by the peoples of newly independent states in the post-colonial period during the latter half of the 20th century. While the people awakened to the existence of their rights, individually and collectively, the majority community in each nation established itself within the economic, social, and political power structures, claiming their rights and formulating laws and practices, setting up institutions to guarantee and safeguard their long-held privileges to the exclusion of the other. In recent times, a more comprehensive view of conflict, its genesis and causes, has emerged from scholars in the developed as well as developing countries. Their hypotheses focus on inequality in its entirety and not only on unequal incomes and poverty.
Could be Sri Lanka.
Excuse me. Yes, I repeat, this hypothesis focuses on inequality in its entirety and not on unequal incomes and poverty alone. It holds that the main cause of dissent and violent conflict is major inequalities occurring horizontally, that is, among groups that are otherwise of equal status culturally. This is normally called horizontal inequality. Deprivation is looked at not only in income and economic terms, but measured as social, political, and cultural inequality. The concept of exclusion and its corollary, the need to adopt policies that promote the inclusion of all segments of the population of a country, is becoming accepted among scholars and policymakers. This implies the construction of inclusive societies, where the benefits of development are equitably shared, where access to education, health services, other infrastructure facilities, and jobs are equally available to all, and where every citizen has equal rights to participate in the political power structures. Numerous studies done in this field demonstrate that inequalities have invariably led to conflict and the absence of peace and stability, as well as to economic regression. Perceived injustice engenders violent or terroristic responses from the victims of that injustice. Frustration and despair caused by continued social marginalization, economic deprivation, and political defeat has been known to result in violence. It was said that young hope betrayed transforms itself into bombs. Leon Trotsky described the two emotions central to terrorism as despair and vengeance. The exclusion of some communities from an equitable share of the benefits of prosperity cause inequalities in every sphere. I wish to dwell briefly upon some of these. Cultural, economic, and political inequalities occurring between specific groups cause deep resentment, resulting in violent struggles. Violence in multi-religious and multi-ethnic nations is not caused by the presence of diversity or by the clash of civilizations, as was stated by Huntington in his various studies, but I believe is due to the exclusion of the less powerful groups. The marginalized groups then mobilize around their group identity, be it religious, ethnic, linguistic, or ideological. It has been affirmed that poverty, injustice, and their relationship to conflict may be measured by the difference in opportunity structures for the excluded. In studies done by Professor Rehman Soban in his Challenging the Injustice of Poverty, and also studies done by Frances Stewart of Oxford University. The monumental advances of science and technology, the spread of knowledge, and the global reach of the communications industry have facilitated awareness of the concepts of equality, rights of the individual, and of freedoms. Conflict has invariably been seen to arise in states that have marginalized minority groups, whereas states that have promoted inclusivity and built cohesive societies seem to enjoy political stability and economic prosperity. The most potent source of violent conflict today is identity. The denial of rights to or the exclusion of certain groups with common identity becomes the bedrock of dissent and violent conflict. This leads me to affirm that ending a conflict or a war does not necessarily bring peace. The mere absence of war is not peace. Peace entails much more than victory in war. As a former French president, François Mitterrand, once stated, peace is a battle. It is not won easily. It demands humility and sacrifice from all. It requires the will to comprehend the root causes of conflict and to seek solutions to them. At this point, I wish to describe some specific instances of the relationship between inequality and conflict. I will classify inequality into four main categories. First, economic and social inequality. This is usually measured by average assets of a household, which would include income from employment and wealth, especially housing and land. Social inequality centers mainly on levels of education and access to good health care. Caste, race, and religion in my part of the world could also give rise to inequality. Studies reveal that there is a significant rise in the probability of conflict in countries with considerable economic and social inequality. This increases threefold when the inequalities occur horizontally between different ethnic groups. For instance, a study of Indonesia confirms a definite relationship between the occurrence of violent ethnic conflict, and comparative economic and social deprivation of marginalized communities. Low levels of economic development have also given rise to religious polarization in this country. The relative socio-economic inequality suffered by Muslims has been found to bear a direct connection to the long-lasting Moro rebellion in the Philippines. Similarly, there is strong evidence to support that the Maoist uprisings in Nepal are closely linked to the deprivation of specific communities on a regional and caste basis, measured by poverty and literacy rates. The second group of inequality is cultural. This has also engendered political instability, even conflicts of extreme violence. Ethnicity, language, religion define the identity of citizens within a state. The ethno-linguistic and religious identity of the majority community is often different from that of smaller groups living within the same state. Conflict has arisen in innumerable countries when the state apportions a larger share of the privileges to the majority community, marginalizing and excluding the minority groups seen as the others. If I may cite some examples, in Peru and Guatemala, cultural discrimination was exercised constitutionally, prohibiting the use of indigenous languages and causing various conflicts. The Protestant Orange Order movement in Northern Ireland, the destruction of religious buildings in India, Palestine, and recently in Malaysia, led to conflictual polarization of victimized communities and to violent conflict. In Sri Lanka, language policy has a similar effect in polarizing a peaceful Tamil community around the demand for equal status. The third group is political inequality, which is yet another major cause of conflict. There exists much evidence to demonstrate that inclusive government reduces the probability of political instability and violent conflict when power is shared and there exists less political inequality. We are aware of many instances where peace prevails even in the presence of serious economic and social inequalities, when political power sharing arrangements function well. Formal systems of power sharing, federal states, territorial autonomy, and electoral systems giving a fair and equitable representation to all communities have proved effective in reducing potential conflict. Political inclusion has thus prevented conflict among marginalized groups, even in the continued absence of policies to alleviate poverty and social deprivation. The examples of Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, and Bolivia are clear evidence of this. It is interesting to note that when Kenya, after some time, changed policy to become politically exclusive, violent conflict ensued recently, until a power-sharing regime was introduced once again. Nigeria defeated the separatist Biafran uprising militarily many years ago and achieved peace through devolution of political power. Malaysia is yet another instance where political inclusion of disadvantaged minorities, even without adopting policies to improve socio-economic status, has sufficed to prevent conflict. Similarly, Canada has found a lasting solution to the separatist demands of Quebec by means of devolving political power to the province. In the case of Peru, the armed uprising of the Sendero Luminoso was militarily defeated, but the causes of conflict, the demands for land and political rights, have not been satisfactorily resolved. Instability and conflict continue in Peru. India, on the other hand, has managed to contain serious conflict for 6 decades after independence by establishing a federal state, whereby political power is effectively shared between its myriad communities belonging to various ethnic, linguistic, religious groups. The formation of an inclusive society through the operation of a non-religious secular constitution has significantly contributed to the cohesion and stability of the Indian state. The recent increase in the occurrence of uprisings there seems to be area or group specific, arising among disadvantaged communities and during periods when the political authorities have slackened in the strict and effective implementation of power sharing, secularism, and equitable development. The fourth group is the nature of the state, which is found to impinge seriously upon conflict. Democratic states with an inclusivist government have successfully prevented or smoothed over potential conflict. Ghana and the provincial state of Sabah in Malaysia, for example, have followed an accommodating and inclusive policy adopted to prevent the escalation of conflict. On the contrary, the vicious and repressive handling of the small, nascent rebellion in East Timor, in Indonesia, led to its escalation into a full-blown civil war, resulting in the formation of a separate state. As for Sri Lanka, my country, little serious research has been done in this field. I will venture, therefore, to state that, based on empirical evidence and my personal knowledge, the constant and comparative economic, social, and cultural deprivation of the northern and eastern regions where the Tamil and Muslim minorities of our country live is clearly related to the violent conflict we have witnessed. Low levels of development of infrastructure, relatively little opportunity to access quality education and employment, political marginalization with minimal opportunity to participate in decision-making processes in the political and administrative structures, together with the language barriers erected by the Sinhala-only policy, are undoubtedly the root causes that gave rise to the terribly violent conflict in my country. The consistent rejection by the state of the demand of the Tamil movements for language parity led to increased demands for power sharing through federalism and finally for a separate state. The experience of the countries I have cited is proof enough that peace ensues where the benefits of economic development as well as political power are equitably shared. Such states have effectively built inclusive and shared societies. It is evident that the proper functioning of inclusive societies could only be achieved within the framework of a free and democratic state. The challenge of our century for many nations remains the enterprise of erecting pluralist, multi-ethnic, and multicultural states. This requires that we manage the existing diversity within our nations, directing the richness of this diversity towards positive change in order to build free, democratic, and prosperous societies. We need to accept and celebrate diversity, not reject it. The combined efforts and skills of peoples of different communities can only enrich our societies, not damage them. Having said all this, I would now like to specifically talk to you briefly about my own experience as head of state of Sri Lanka in this sphere. My government inherited a country torn apart by ethnic strife and civil war. The dominant ideology of the state until this time was an exclusivist one, which presented the rights of the majority community to the exclusion of the rights of the others. The predominant discourse advanced the view of the superiority of the Sinhala Buddhist majority. This ideology dominated over all others to the point that every successive government abrogated their responsibility to undertake effective measures to negotiate a settlement of the ethnic question. For the first time in the history of independent Sri Lanka, my government offered a comprehensive package of solutions to the minorities' problem. Even while we were obliged to continue with the war, we undertook development in the regions where a large concentration of the minorities lived. At the same time, we proposed to enact a new constitution containing extensive devolution of power to the minorities, together with various measures adopted to guarantee their rights. This draft constitution also contained measures to abolish the executive presidency that embodies a high degree of authoritarian powers. However, we could not translate our dream of enacting this constitution and transforming a divided and violent Lanka into a united nation where humanity and peace prevails because of the consistent and violent rejection of our peace proposals by the LTT, the Tamil rebel group, as well as the obstinacy of the parliamentary opposition in refusing to give the government the few votes needed to make up the required two-thirds majority in parliament. The continuous denial of the rights of the marginalized Tamil community led to a recrudescence of Tamil demands for equal rights into the demand for a separate state and the adoption of terrorist politics. I obviously didn't switch it off, sorry. When we gained independence from colonial rule, the process of nation building required a strategy to include all minorities. We needed to accept our diversity, comprehend its richness, and formulate policies to include everyone in the process of nation building, development, and governance. Today, we have an unprecedented opportunity to achieve lasting peace. The war has been decisively won by the state. The major antagonists have been defeated convincingly. Yet, we have not seriously begun to win the battle for peace. As I stated earlier, peace implies bringing in and including the other fully and honestly, not only in the process of development, but also as full and equal partners of the process of government, to power sharing. In other words, in Sri Lanka, where we have three major communities that have lived together for nearly 2 millennia, an essential prerequisite for peace, a stable and strong government, and prosperity is a democratic, pluralist state. This is the only magic potion I know to bind together diverse peoples of a multi-ethnic, multilinguistic, multi-religious, and cultural country like ours as one undivided and strong nation. Today, we see instead a deeply disturbing trend. The war victory of the state over the separatist forces is being projected by the state as an exclusive triumph of the Sinhalese Buddhists over the others. The official discourse often takes a dangerous turn towards the natural right of the majority and an attitude that encourages the ideology of the predominance of the majority. We hear an extremist discourse of Sinhala Buddhist exclusivism. Anti-terrorist emotions are being harnessed to increase anti-Tamil and now anti-foreigner and even anti-everyone else sentiments by means of a massive state-led media campaign. They dig deep into the Sinhala Buddhist psyche, searching out the fears and concerns of a small and weak country to direct them against so-called enemies. The Sinhala Buddhist identity is projected as the exclusively legitimate one, with the right to dominance over the state, the body politic, and its attendant privileges. We see a hardening of views and attitudes. The exclusivist ideology is being utilized to consolidate and further enhance the presently authoritarian powers of the executive. The Constitution has been recently amended to remove provisions which guaranteed fundamental rights, the independence of the judiciary, public and police services, and ensured transparent governance and contained corruption, which was the so-called 17th Amendment, which was recently abrogated. Instead, provisions have been promulgated to give further powers to the executive presidency and remove limits placed on the term of office of the chief executive. The military and police are being accorded an increasingly important role in civil affairs. The denial of media freedom, which was being justified by the state on the grounds of security concerns during the war, still continue unabated 2.5 years after the conclusion of the war. The practice of challenging one extremist ideology by another tends to continue the cycle of extremism and violence, because the one is the mirror image of the other, and they sustain each other in an unending cycle of violence. There is evidence that to end this cycle of violence, one has to challenge extremism with an ideology and a practice which falls outside the reach and comprehension of the extremist. That is, the discourse of inclusion as opposed to exclusion, of understanding and generosity as opposed to the exclusivist's hatred and refusal that the other has similar rights as himself. We need to rise above emotionalism and adopt objective national policies. The view that is presently being popularized that political power need not be shared with the minority community and that it would suffice to grant them some economic development has been disproved time and time again, as I argued earlier. We need to understand that sharing the privileges enjoyed by the majority with the others will in no way reduce the strength of the majority. Instead, it will enhance it by bringing together divided communities, which will henceforth work together and contribute their skills, talents, and knowledge that were denied to the nation since the beginning of the conflict. The diverse skills and talents of all our peoples collectively participating in the nation-building process will immensely enrich and unify a divided, economically weak and fragile state. But for this, positive leadership is essential to effect profound change. History is written by leaders, good and bad. Great leaders write new chapters of human history because they have the courage to stride towards the unknown and envision a collective national project. They do not need to conjure up enemies to stay on top. They possess the wisdom and ability to bring in everyone, the others, into the collective national project. They can traverse primordial emotional responses to reach the realm of the possible. Weak leaders use the concept of the enemy as a tool of government management. We have seen this happening over and over again. The most famous or infamous one who did this was Adolf Hitler. Their incapacity to envision a greater project for their peoples, to shape a dialogue of different views and emotions in order to reach a common humanity, is concealed under the mist of a so-called struggle against the enemy. At this point, I wish to sound a note of warning. We live in an era today where globalization is fast eroding physical boundaries erected around individual states. In the name of international solidarity and human freedom, the powerful have arrogated to themselves the authority to resolve conflicts arising within sovereign states. We see it happening around us all the time. It is urgent that states manage their internal problems effectively, resolving them in a durable manner if they are to safeguard their sovereignty and independence while participating actively in the international community of nations. I think I will stop now to let you participate in the discussion, and I would like to respond to your questions or comments thereafter. Thank you very much, and thank you again for giving me this opportunity to meet with you and express some thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Kumaratunga. We appreciate it very, very much and enjoyed your wide-ranging address. I'd like to start out with a question before we turn it over to our audience, consisting of university professors and townspeople and lots of students, I'm delighted to say. Of course, we're, in America, I suppose, we focus on gender a great deal. As we should, because women in this country, as in most countries, are underrepresented, certainly in high public office. Could you give us a sense of what it was like to serve as executive president in your country? And we'd be interested to know whether people accepted you in that role or whether you had instances of, as we would call it, sexism, either here or abroad in your role as president.
Actually, you would be surprised, I had no problems at all. This may be due to the fact that already in my country, the trail was blazed before me by another lady, as you said, who happened to be the first female Prime Minister of the world, and she had come to be accepted. And also in our region, we had several women leaders. Apparently South Asia, which has today 8 countries, has had the largest concentration of women leaders. So, no, I had no problems at all.
Well, that's good to hear. Yes. Yes, if you work, Mike Damon is going to take the mic around to those of you who wish to ask questions. I do want you to identify yourself, give your name and your affiliation with the university or with the town before you give your question. Who should we call on first? Who's going to be bold? There we go. I knew very well you would be.
Hi, I'm Darius Neighbors, and I worked for the university in housing and residence life, and I graduated from the college in 2007 and studied political philosophy, policy, and law. And my question, I guess, kind of relates to self-determination. So what role does that have in determining how effective, I guess, merging the government is together? And the reason I ask that is kind of looking at the United States with the Native American population. They had a system or structure of government that they were used to, and then we kind of self-imposed a government on them. And especially, I guess, how that'd play out with indigenous groups, because I imagine that'd be different for, like South America or India or other places like that. So what role does self-determination play out for indigenous cultures and having kind of government forced on them and leading to that further conflict?
Well, that's a good question. Self-determination is normally demanded, it's not given. And if you are specifically talking of the American Indian population, they had no choice. They were physically decimated, and a new system which was brought from old Europe was imposed upon them. So I don't think there was any question of the American Indians asking for self-determination. They were hustled into limited areas, chased away from their lands, excuse my saying so, but this is history, and corralled into certain areas, and that was it. So normally people who have the right to have at least who could voice their dissent and protest and ask for self-determination, does so. In my country it happened, and in many others.
you have a follow-up, Drive?
Yeah, I'm sure. Like, does that lead to extra conflict when they don't have self-determination, or is there less?
Well, it depends, as I was trying to say, it depends on how you handle it. Lots of countries, take India for example, it has myriad number of different religious, ethnic, linguistic groups. But at the time of independence, and also India was different states, it wasn't one country. It was unified together by British colonial rule and a little before that too. And after independence, in order to keep it as one unit, the leaders of independent India had the foresight and the wisdom to realize that they had to give a certain amount of self-rule. So therefore they adopted a federal state with a lot of powers given to each federal state, where the different types, groups of people lived. And that resolved the problem. And I still believe that at the time of independence or later, if we did the same thing in Sri Lanka, we wouldn't have had all this terrible violence and its consequences. Of course, federalism is considered a bad word in my country, and whoever who talks about it is abused in absolute violent terms. I was also recently abused by the government media for saying something like that. But many countries, examples I cited, have resolved the question by perhaps not giving a separate state, but by taking action in time before things go out of hand. But if you do let it go out of hand, like I was saying in East Timor, they had to give a separate state. And in other countries, they are still fighting for that separate state. We have militarily defeated the Tamil Tigers, which was a terrible, ruthless terrorist group, which was a kind of outgrowth of the consistent refusal to accede to the much less extreme demands of the Tamil people previously. And it became more and more extreme. But now they have been decimated. But we still have a Tamil population living in the country. The Tamil civilian population is very different to the terrorists. But if one tends to see all of them in the same light as the powers that we are doing today, conflict will certainly, well, history has proved that conflict will ensue again. So it has to be handled. It has to be handled honestly, effectively, and each different conflict has its own characteristics. You can't have the same solution for every one of them. It has to be handled differently. And if it is in dialogue with those who are demanding their rights, and if they are satisfied, conflict can be contained and resolved. That's my belief.
My name is Chrissy Monahan, and I'm a doctoral student at the Curry School of Education, UVA. And I would like to ask about rights to and within education in Sri Lanka, and how educational practices are being utilized either to advance or maybe they're challenging the discourse of inclusion, or working towards that aim that you laid out.
You know, former presidents are not supposed to be apparently critical of present ones. So that's a very difficult question for me to answer. It doesn't look good. No, because this is a question that was very, very close to my heart. We found that at the time we came into government that the education system was very divisive. We were teaching history to our children, history books which said, which very clearly, I don't want to give the details, which very clearly, Professor H.L. will be able to give more details, separated the Sinhalese from the Tamils. They were the others, we were the great race. We were the lion race and all that. And Sinhala means the lion race. I don't know how that word came about. You know, history was being almost deformed to marginalize the other communities. We rewrote the history books. Within about 2 weeks of becoming Prime Minister, before I became President, I appointed a presidential task force, which was a new institution which I created for education, with not only government representatives, but people from the private sector, well-known educationists, academics, working together to evolve a new education policy, which was done very fast. I sat with them for hours, and one of my requests was, our education system, you know, we boasted that we had very good education indices, which was true because we have almost 100% literacy. But from a very long time, because we had free education in the country. But for several decades before we came in, education had not been modernized, it had not been looked at, science teaching was weak, information technology was not taught at all in schools in 1994. Much poorer countries had made great strides forward in those fields. So we had a lot to do. In addition to modernizing education, to modernizing teaching methods, to giving more facilities to schools, I also specifically requested them to bring in subjects and various activities into schools from a very, you know, where the children would be made from a very young age to learn inclusivity. We brought in again the teaching of English in a serious way as the linked language, which was a very serious lacuna since the Sinhala-only policy was adopted, though it was not stated by the government. English teaching was sort of pushed aside, so that Tamil people from the north didn't speak the Sinhala language, and vice versa. We couldn't even dialogue. So how could we live together? So in India, they adopted English as the linked language, because it's a country of 36 languages and so many other dialects. So we brought in English again. There was a separate English stream. Children who wished to study only in English, learning, of course, their mother language, was started again. And we even started peace education in every school. A separate peace unit was created in the National Education Ministry. All I can say is that is all over.
Other questions? Yes. Some here.
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Dobbins, and I'm a second year in the law school here. And my question for you, ma'am, is especially in light of the increase in female-headed households post-Civil War, do you feel that the current segmentation of family law in Sri Lanka furthers women's rights or impedes efforts to further those rights?
The segmentation of?
Yes, ma'am. The segmentation of family law in Sri Lanka.
Family law. I am not a specialist of this area, but, well, on principle, it would further enhance gender inequality. But I don't know details to discuss it.
My name is Dishanta Chalaya, and I work for the University of Virginia Medical Center, finance manager. And my question to you is actually, I was working under you as a Navy commander before I migrated here. And my simple question to you is, during your period, why was not it possible for you to end the war? And after Rajapaksa regime came in, they ended the war within a short period of time. What was your difficulties in ending the war during your 11 years of presidency?
Well, if you were in the Navy, I'm surprised that you asked the question. Well, you see, the Tamil Tigers had control of the entire northern province. To be very brief, it's a long story, but I'm trying to be brief. The northern province consisting of 5 districts at the time my government came into power. The Sri Lankan government's held sway only in 5 or 6 camps, naval and army camps, and all the rest was controlled by Prabhakaran and his forces. Mr. Prabhakaran sat in the Kachari, which is the main seat of government administration in the Jaffna city, commanding and giving instructions to all government public servants paid by the government, and that's how it continued. Even the army, the soldiers, during the dry season, who were in the Palali camp, that was a main military camp in Jaffna, had to sometimes come out of their camp to get water from, because the water sources inside the Palali camp used to dry up. They had to ring up Prabhakaran's people and ask them, can we have permission to come out to get our water? That was the situation. As soon as my government came in, I didn't believe in war. I believed in negotiated settlement. We offered discussions and negotiations to the LTT, who accepted. Within a few weeks, we started discussing with them. There was a ceasefire for 8 months, soon after my government came in. But the LTT kicked the ceasefire in the teeth for no clear reason and went back to war. And 8 months after that, we took over Jaffna, because I said, well, if it's peace, it's peace. If it's war, it's war. And we took over the city of Jaffna, and in the 2 or 3 years after that, we took over about 70% of the total land area of the north, which was under the LTT. The Rajapaksa government took back the other 30 or 25%. Now, why didn't we do the same thing? The Rajapaksa government used the fighter planes which I bought with monies that were saved in an economy which I developed hugely, where we had doubled GDP, doubled per capita income, and all that, with long-range weaponry such as multi-barrel rocket launchers and all that, which were all bought by my government. But I didn't want to use them because the LTT had surrounded itself with several rings of civilians who were forced to live around the area, the limited area where they sort of withdrew to, which was Mulethivu and Kilinochchi. And we would have had to kill hundreds of thousands of those civilians, as it happened this time, if we were to win the war. And I was not going to do that. So therefore, we kept trying to persuade the LTT, not just telling them. People used to think that I was stupid, thinking that Mr. Prabhakaran, one of the world's worst terrorists, was going to suddenly see the light of day and accept to come to talks with us. No, I knew that he wouldn't. But then Prabhakaran was also only one man. We used all kinds of strategies to win over, first and foremost, the Tamil civilians who lived in those areas, the Hearts and Minds operations, which were very successful. We were able to indirectly persuade quite a large number of his leaders. Kittu, his military commander, was made to cross over by my government, not by the present one. So all those were strategies we used. At the same time, we had all kinds of other strategies where we only targeted the military leaders of the LTT and killed them. The long-range recce patrols were started also during my time. None of those were done during this government. So we were doing that kind of thing. It would have taken a little longer, but we would have saved the lives of hundreds of thousands of Tamil civilians. And at the time, I had to take retirement 1 year before, as you said. That was some bit of skullduggery by the judicial system, which we will not dwell upon today. We had signed a landmark agreement with the LTT, which was called PTOMS. the post-tsunami, blah, 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 where for the first time the LTT agreed to work formally by signing this agreement to work with the government of Sri Lanka. There were also some symbolic things of importance that happened in that agreement, where until then the LTT didn't accept that there was a government of Sri Lanka. They used to call it the government of Colombo or the Sinhala government, and they were the government of Tamil Eelam. Now, in this agreement, they signed saying that the LTT and the government of Sri Lanka will do this and do that and all that. And all this was very important. This was for reconstruction after tsunami of the damaged infrastructure and other things in the northern and eastern provinces where the Tamil people lived. It didn't just happen. It was a result of the years of development. We wanted to do development after taking over Jaffna. The LTT sent suicide bombers and killed quite a number of government public servants who went there to Jaffna to start the development process. But we carried on nevertheless. We used other strategies. We used foreign agencies of foreign aid-giving countries, because the LTT couldn't kill foreigners. They didn't touch a foreigner, only because the LTT needed the Tamil diaspora to live in these countries in order to collect money, which is how they existed. So we knew this, we banked on that. And we said, okay, if you're going to kill our officials, let us hand over to the foreign agencies of foreign countries, accepted foreign countries, the French, the Germans, the this and the that and the other ones. Even the World Bank had various groups working there. And after some years, after we took over Jaffna and some parts of the north, we did a large amount of infrastructure development. And for the first time, the Tamil youths in those areas could understand that a government in Sri Lanka was willing to do something for them, because they were told no government of Sri Lanka except us, the LTT, will do anything for the Tamil people. And we found more and more young people running away, not agreeing to join the LTT ranks and become LTT cadres. So this was the hearts and minds thing. Then the various negotiations processes which were started during my presidency by my party as well as the opposition, which was in power for a short time, also convinced a large number of their people, including leaders like Kittu, who was his military commander, that there was another way possible. So all this had some effect, and then when tsunami came and devastated the whole area, Prabhakaran was helpless to do anything to develop even basic infrastructure. He had to come to us. They suggested that they discuss with us, and we signed the PTOMs. But then I was sent packing home, and the PTOMs was torn up by the present president, and he started the military conflict again. So, excellent. We have destroyed the Tamil terrorists. Well, the terrorists. But in the process, we have destroyed a large number of Tamil civilians, and we have earned ourselves a very, very bad image and name internationally. And so it goes. Now I realized that this was going to happen, and this is why the international community was very appreciative of my policies. A large number of Western countries, in appreciation of the fact that for the first time a government of Sri Lanka was beginning to look at the problem differently, in a more constructive manner, they heeded our request to ban the LTT in many of their countries. The United Kingdom, the USA, Canada banned the collection of funds, Australia did that, India had done it before, Malaysia, and many countries like that. So they wouldn't have done that today, for example, or if the LTT existed, or before. This was because they realized that we were able to make a difference between the Tamil people and the LTT terrorists. So, but that kind of strategy, you can't just barge in and destroy everything and finish off. It takes a little time. And I'm fairly sure that if the PTOMS was allowed to be implemented, it would have made a sea change. Because for the first time, the LTT would have realized that they can work with a government and that they don't need a separate state or violence and a war to obtain the rights that they were fighting for.
Comprehensive answer. We have one more, last question.
I hope I don't disappoint everybody with my last question.
Well, then we'll go to another question.
That's right. That's right. You can always have a follow-on. My name is Christopher Corky. I graduated from the undergraduate business program here in '97. Feels like 400 years ago. Ma'am, I'd like to ask if you could share your thoughts on the current state of the relationship between the United States government and Sri Lanka, the direction it's heading, especially in terms of U.S. calls, among others, for more than the current government is willing to do in terms of investigation, in terms of reconciliation, and perhaps what the U.S. government can do to support the elements within the Rajapaksa government that are interested in helping do away with the disparities that are at the basis of the issue.
Well, once again, I shall not go into details, but the government seems to be in trouble in the area of foreign relations. The United Nations and other countries are calling for war crimes investigations. The government is, I'm just stating facts, I'm not giving my opinion. The government is refusing to do any kind of investigation. We need not have got into such hot water if we had investigated some problems that had occurred right at the beginning of this regime, like some aid workers who were killed in Trincomalee, and apportion blame to those who did it and finish off, but they were not willing to do that. So it has snowballed into something very big and serious.
We'll take that was a short answer, so we'll take one more question. I see a couple of hands up.
I can only say one thing about this. When we came into government, I came in screaming against a lot of human rights violations that had been practiced by the previous government, the party of the opposition today. And we did brought in laws, regulations, created institutions, and actually took action to guarantee human rights and also investigate what had happened earlier. And I even had training programs for soldiers who were in the north, in public relations with the Tamil people. And the first major human rights violation known to us that occurred, which was the rape and murder of a young Tamil girl, the famous Chandrika Bandarnaika case. We had a very, very quick investigation. For the first time in the history of the country, we adopted a process called a trial by jury, which had never been adopted before, which is a judicially accepted procedure, but it can investigate fast. And found 9 soldiers guilty, and they were jailed. We don't have capital punishment, practically speaking, and they were in jail, but I don't know what's happened to them. They may have been released by this government. And then one other similar, the international community began to shout that there were some bodies emerging in Chenmani, isn't it? They were called the Chenmani graves in Jaffna. And I allowed the international institutions to come in and begin investigations. They were digging around and they took the bodies to see whether most of them were much older than my period. Some of them were from our period, because when we went into Jaffna, there was a lot of fighting that went on. And we were willing to apportion blame to whoever had done it. So it was a different approach to governance.
My name is Joseph. I'm an alumni at U.Va. When I walked in, I decided not to ask a question, but I just want to ask this one too. Microphone, can you hear me, everybody? Do you see, is there any future role for you in Sri Lankan politics? Do you see, is there any space will emerge for you to play? And also, could you sort of like share with us about your current role within your party that was founded by your parents?
Well, I don't think today's subject covers that area, and I don't wish to answer that question. But I have consciously excluded myself from active political involvement in Sri Lanka, mainly because I may also be made to disappear if I did, like many others.
Well, I guess we have another question. If we keep getting short answers, we'll continue to take questions.
You, of course, mentioned about the tsunami, which is, of course, which happened during your presidency, a huge natural disaster by any standard. And I was wondering whether you could share some thoughts on, how you handled that crisis. Obviously, things went out very difficult at the beginning, but things turned out okay. Sri Lanka rebuilt after that very well. So if you could tell us, I would appreciate it.
What's your identity?
Yeah, my name is Nilangali Yanagi. I grew up in Sri Lanka. Now I'm a professor here in the physics department.
Wonderful.
That is a long story. I don't think I can handle that today. But there's documentation of how we handled it. All I can say is that we got into action very fast. In Sri Lanka, we have very good established institutions of government, which I used very, extensively. And we set up institutions also to handle the tsunami reconstruction. We brought in the private sector as well as the government. The private sector gave us magnificent support without any payment or anything. The international community gave us immense support. But we coordinated all that without letting it get out of hand. And we were able to build either finish or substantially start constructing the 70,000 houses that were destroyed by the time I retired 11 months after tsunami. This is why I do not understand the present authorities taking so long. In 2.5 years after the war, only some 20,000 houses have been reconstructed in the north. We did 70,000 houses in 11 months. And so many other things, the roads, the railways, railway lines. We didn't finish all that in 11 months, but we started all that. We began innovative systems to cut short delays, the normal government delays. And I was fully involved with that, but this has been documented, and you'll be able to get all that. Part of it is on my website also.
A couple of if you've got quick questions, we'll take them, and then we're going to wind up. I see two right here, and I think that'll finish us off.
President, I'm Rohan Rajapaksa. I'm clinical
Come
veterinarian
close to the
I'm Rohan Rajapaksa. I'm a clinical veterinarian at U.Va here. So I grew up during the time of your regime, and we heard over and over you accepted that the Sri Lankan education system was you admitted that it was in a really bad shape, right? But at the time of you came and during the time at the time of you leave, as far as my understanding, nothing has been done to turn around the situation. You know that, for example, from my batchmates, and half of them now already immigrated in other countries. And you admitted, but nothing has been done. So can you explain it, though you admitted the situation, so can you explain your inefficiency or you just neglect the situation? Sorry,
Neither.
That is the truth, sorry.
What year did you leave Sri Lanka?
1999.
We started the education reforms in 98, and we changed a lot. We achieved a lot. You will have to study it. Go into my website and see all the work that was done. No, it's not talk, it is facts. Just look at the facts. I'm sorry you don't know the facts. I can just give you a few. Well, the World Bank voted Sri Lanka and my presidency to the first place in education achievement in the year 2005. And they didn't do that because I bribed them or something. There was factual achievements. I can tell you just a few things, but I'm not willing to go into all the details. Go into my website, it has given in detail what we achieved in education, but a lot of it has been destroyed by now. For example, in 94, UNICEF or UNESCO studies showed that only 13% of students in secondary school were conversant in mathematics or arithmetic, as we call it, and only some 23 or 25% were properly conversant in their mother language. Teaching was so bad. And our education reforms program, the rewriting of books, the training of teachers, there were 100,000 out of a body of 200,000 teachers who were untrained, who had been just recruited by the previous government without any training at all. You know, HL, that the teacher training was a very, very good system in Sri Lanka previously, but they had just been recruited without much qualifications and not trained thereafter. We opened 88 new additional teacher training colleges, and every one of them had to go through annual training programs. Sometimes twice a year, if you could afford it, if not once a year. And they were retrained in the new methods of teaching with the new substance in the books that we had. Every single book was rewritten in the curricula. The curricula themselves were redesigned. And at the end of about 5 years or less, we were able to take up the 13% in mathematics to some 50%, and in the mother language, the 20-odd% to over 60%. So that itself, this is something that strikes me now, because I haven't been talking about this for a long time. I can't remember the other figures. If you go into my website, presidentcbk.org, you will see the education things all enumerated.
This is definitely the last question. What was the other hand up over here? Let this individual ask it. There we go.
For the first time in Sri Lanka, even Royal College didn't have a single computer. IT teaching was begun in 1999. After you left the country, obviously you didn't keep yourself informed, perhaps. I'm sorry to say.
Hi, my name's Callie McGrath, and I'm a student at the law school here. So it's my understanding that during the war and immediately after, many Tamil civilians and ex-combatants were detained in welfare centers. And my question is, given your vision of an inclusive society, what recommendations do you have on how to reintegrate these populations now?
Well, that will be another talk another day.
And with that, I think we will simply say, Madam President, we appreciate your forthrightness, your bluntness, which, by the way, was matched by some of our questioners here at Mr. Jefferson's University. We don't hold back, and I think we've just proved that to you. But you handled it with grace. We appreciate enormously your taking the time and effort to come and be with us, and we will all remember the occasion for a long time to come. Thank you so much for being with us.